Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider. We're starting a new series this week. I usually do series that run about 3 episodes long, and we're starting a new series this week. It's a little bit of experimentation on my part, rather than throwing in my 2 cents on topics that others have raised. I'm just kind of going off on my own and bringing up some issues that I've been thinking about and see what happens. So this week's episode is The Center of the World, Community. What are the core values that make our lives meaningful? Thomas Sowell wisely told us that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And Christopher Hitchens advised us that in life, we must choose our regrets. Anytime we choose one path, we simultaneously give up the other ones. So how do we decide what is worth giving up in order to obtain something else that we want more? The key is to choose wisely by making a choice that you can live with in the long run. Then you won't have to torture yourself with regrets that are too heavy to bear. And contrary to popular belief, it is actually possible to do that if you train yourself to be wise in analyzing the options with some simple honesty. Don't just blunder through your world and your relationships as though life is something that happens to you. Live deliberately. There is really no doubt, as we look around us, that we are on the precipice of some major cultural changes going forward. We can all feel it in the air, and inside ourselves as well. To put it bluntly, secularism has dismally failed us, and that assessment is really beyond dispute anymore, at least for anyone who is paying attention and being honest about what they see. You can argue that it should have worked, or that things would have been better if it had worked out the way that it was supposed to. But the only thing that is truly important is that it didn't work. And that is as plain as the nose on your face, although we can each pretend that things are otherwise if we so choose. But that seems like a pointless waste of effort to me. So let's just skip to the part where we admit our dissatisfaction and failure, and start looking at the other options that are available to us, shall we? There's an old saying from Ben Franklin that goes, "A man wrapped up in himself makes a very small bundle." Secularism encourages everyone to wrap up their entire world around the most trivial and unfulfilling, not to mention fleeting parts of themselves. And people have found out that actually following this advice has made for some very confining and very hollow lives. You can try to argue that it works for some people if you feel the need to, but I tend to doubt that. I tend to think that all of those kinds of protestations are mostly empty words, coming as a mostly automatic human response to our instinctive need to justify whatever choices we've already made and are not really happy with. But we feel stuck with our choices, so we defend them to the bitter end, even though we are far from satisfied with the results. But either way, whether I'm right about that or not, the reality remains that most people require a life that consists of something more than all the endless navel-gazing that has been going on lately. Deep down, they know that they just aren't that interesting, varied, or mysterious enough to fascinate themselves completely, however alluring the idea might be of pretending to be otherwise. In the end, lives like this just end up being performances that no one really buys, least of all yourself. Secularism insists that you can have a brimming, full life by prioritizing the pursuit of satisfying every fleeting whim that possesses you from one moment to the next. And that doing this will lead to a meaningful and happy existence. But all the available evidence seems to point to the contrary. Once again, you can argue that this approach to life sounds like it should have worked. But why does that really matter when the fact is that it clearly hasn't? People have listened to this new gospel of self-gratification and self-indulgence for decades, committing to it more fully with each generation. They have based their whole philosophy regarding life around it. But even as they commit to it ever more aggressively, they still find themselves feeling empty, directionless, and above all else, completely hopeless. Some people have yet to make the connection between the cause and the effect here, but many of them are waking up to the fact that this whole framework is just fundamentally wrong, and it's time to stop torturing ourselves and just admit it. There are, of course, always going to be a few people who would rather continue down a path that is making them miserable than to ever admit that they took the wrong path at some point. And that's fine. If their pride is really worth that trade-off for them, then so be it. They're free to choose how they want to lead their life. But that doesn't mean that we are obligated to pretend that the arguments they put forward in order to try to justify their choices are compelling, or that their performance is a convincing one. They get to choose how to live their own life. No one is going to try to stop them. But the rest of us get to choose for ourselves too. That's what free will is. We are each responsible to choose for ourselves. The key is to make a deliberate choice, one that you can live with. Others are free to continue down whatever path they choose to. No one is going to take away someone's right to decide for themselves. But most people seem to be completely over the idea of pretending that all choices are equal. Some choices do lead to better outcomes than other ones do, and they are therefore better choices. And many people have decided that imitating the people who have made better choices themselves and have gotten better outcomes as a result is their best chance of achieving those same better outcomes for themselves. That choice doesn't come from some sense of moral superiority. It's just about not wasting their one and only life repeating the same failed experiment that others have already tried repeatedly with only subpar results to show for it. Someone else may choose to do exactly that with their own life, and fair enough. That's their choice to make. But we aren't all obligated to do the same thing, or to pretend that choosing that path is the wisest option available just so that we aren't seen as being judgmental. Not doing drugs is actually better than doing drugs. Not cheating on the people you claim to love is actually better than cheating on them. Lovingly raising the children you make is actually better than being a deadbeat dad. It's not being judgmental to say those things. It's just assessing the two paths honestly, based on where they end up leading people, and based on the results. Honesty is an acceptable guideline for choosing how you're going to conduct and manage your own life. Honesty isn't the same thing as superiority, and it isn't the same thing as being judgmental. It's just what it sounds like. Honesty. You can't assess things accurately without assessing them honestly. And using honesty as a guideline for your own life isn't something that any of us should let ourselves be bullied into feeling ashamed of. Misery loves company. We all know that. So there will always be those who try to act as though your choosing to make a different choice than they did is a form of a personal attack on their values or even on their worth as a human being. You can't avoid outraging people like that, and it's essentially a waste of time to try. Most people no longer have the motivation to go on having these pointless arguments with unreasonable, outraged people anymore. If someone is going to be so beyond reason that you're trying to make the best choice you can for yourself offends their self-worth, then most people have reached the point where it is not worth their time to endlessly kiss it and try to make it better for them. Especially because it never ends up working anyway. And nothing is ever enough to appease people like that. It's the definition of pointless. And they've concluded that it's not worth their time, focus, or energy to even try anymore. Not when there are so many more productive, not to mention more uplifting things that they could be doing instead. I won't win any popularity points for saying this, but limiting your focus exclusively to yourself does end up equaling living your life in an ever-shrinking, collapsing black hole of a world. You can take all the injustices that you perceive in your life and make them the center of your world if you choose to. But that will only result in your becoming a resentful, envious, miserable, and bitter person. And that will ultimately cause you to end up alone. Because no one enjoys being around a person like that. Not even other people who do the same thing. Not even if it's justified. You won't even want to be around you if you let yourself become that kind of person. You can, of course, alternately center your whole world around satisfying your animal lusts instead of focusing on your grievances, if you think that will make you feel fulfilled. But if you treat yourself like a piece of meat and invite others to do the same, then you will end up feeling like a piece of meat who has been victimized by the sociopaths who will take you up on your offer and use you accordingly. And you are not going to feel good about yourself afterwards. You're just not. I can't wave a magic wand and change what the results will be for you. No one can, despite all their promises to do so. You can pretend that things are other than they are, but you'll never really succeed in fooling yourself. And at the end of the day, you are the only audience that matters, because only you have to live non-stop with your life. So if you're miserable 24/7, then a convincing performance that you put on for the benefit of others will be a small consolation to you in your misery. Wouldn't it make more sense to choose a path that actually succeeds in making you happy instead of one that forces you to pretend to be happy out of a misplaced loyalty for somebody else's random doctrine about life? You can choose to center your life around having fun and never growing up if that sounds more appealing to you. You can live like Peter Pan, sleeping in late, playing video games all day, and partying like a 20-year-old every night if you choose to. I'm certainly not going to stop you. But there is nothing that screams loser to everyone around you more loudly than being the oldest guy at a frat party. There's a time and a season for everything in life. But there is nothing that repulses us more deeply than someone who is still in that phase of life long after they should have moved on. We can't really help it. We just find that completely pathetic and disgusting, whether we say so or not. It's the same reaction that we instinctively have to a much older woman who still tries to dress and act like a teenager. That's not being ageist. An older woman can be a stunning beauty. Jane Seymour is a perfect example of that. But even her loveliness would instantly disintegrate if she threw on a push-up bra and a crop top, got some piercings, dyed her hair green, and went clubbing with a bunch of 19-year-olds. And once again, whether you're willing to admit it or not, we all know that this is true. So why pretend otherwise? For whom? I don't know about you, but I'm a big girl, and I can handle the truth. We've let our lives deteriorate into some endless obligation to give non-stop performances for each other. Why? Continuing down the paths I've mentioned is a choice that will always be available to whoever wants it. It's just that most people want more out of their life than that. And they're finally willing to start admitting it, even if that upsets some people who are willing to settle for a world of insincere pretend joy. They may not be sure about where they should look in order to find something more, but they do know that there is supposed to be more than this, and that they need more than what they're being offered these days. C.S. Lewis said, "Hell is locked from the inside," and we all had the key. Holding on to the very thing that is limiting your world and making your life a miserable one is behaving just like an addict does. They can't imagine living in what they incorrectly assume will be a more confining world if it's one without the drugs in it. So they stay enthralled to the very thing that is enslaving them, forfeiting a much greater sense of freedom than they can even begin to comprehend. Sadly, it is much easier to identify what doesn't work in life than what actually does. That's an unavoidable part of the struggle of living and learning. But one thing that can be helpful is to try and look at what has worked for the majority of people in the past. We are communal animals. That's just the way it is. Total isolation is akin to a death sentence for our species. That used to be literally true, and now it's mostly, though not exclusively, a figurative statement. But taken either way, it's still as true as it ever was. We are so communal as a species that we even ritualize voluntarily sharing our food with each other. And we prefer not to eat alone. Does your dog seem to feel the same way when another creature tries to approach his bowl? It is extremely rare for another species to value companionship so much that they are willing to share their food to the same degree that we do. Sharing food usually results in violence between other species, or at the very least, in the weaker members of the pack having to cower and wait their turn and take whatever is left. Like it or not, a need for community is clearly hardwired into us as a species. You can fight against that wiring, but you will lose. So, once again, that seems like a big waste of your life in order to gain nothing in return. Is it any wonder that trying to formulate our entire life around trying to turn our backs on the way that we have evolved has completely failed us? No wonder people are looking for a sense of belonging in all the worst places possible, out of sheer desperation created by their gnawing sense of emptiness. This is why people have become so involved in politics when they never cared about it before. It's why they all want to be keyboard warriors, fighting with complete strangers on behalf of their team in the culture wars. It's why we've degenerated into a bunch of tribes who mostly spend their time throwing feces at the other tribes. We're trying to fill the empty holes in our lives in any way that we can. But why is that emptiness there? And why do we feel it so acutely? The deterioration of the social skills of the average person and the severing of the necessary bonds of community which sustains us has greatly contributed to the overwhelming dissatisfaction that people seem to feel about the present world, as well as to the hopeless depression and unmanageable levels of anxiety that so many others experience when it comes to thoughts of the future. For a long time now, psychological literature has verified the clear links between people who focus disproportionately on themselves and people who suffer disproportionately from high levels of depression and anxiety. From a psychological standpoint, these two things are one and the same. The only surprising thing is that anyone would ever think to begin with that an entire philosophy based on doing this very thing to ourselves would ever succeed in doing anything other than driving people insane. There are some fortunate people who have managed to survive the mass deconstruction of the communities that we all used to live in. And those people just so happen to be doing much better at weathering life's storms than the rest of us are. Orthodox Jewish communities are a perfect example of this. Because of their religion, they all have to live within walking distance of the synagogue. They can't use technology on the Sabbath, including their cars, which means that they all end up living in the same neighborhoods in order to be within walking distance of the synagogue when the Sabbath rolls around. This Sabbath also gives them a break from our ever-present screens, at least for one whole day every week, forcing them to re-engage with each other and with the tangible world, which is something that is so easy to put off without these communal norms and expectations in place. And because they all live in the same communities and are all leading fundamentally similar lives, they are always surrounded by family structures and tight-knit communities that make them feel connected in ways that most of us deeply long for. They aren't left adrift in the world like the rest of us are. When one of them loses their job, the rest of the community immediately steps in to bring food and help them look for work and a new source of income. No one in these stable communities faces their problems alone. And no one is tempted to settle for accepting the demoralizing lot of being a permanent charity case. They aren't accepting charity from some anonymous stranger or from a faceless corporation or government. They know that they are taking resources out of their own neighbors' pockets, and they are therefore motivated to become a contributing member of their society again as soon as possible, which restores their sense of purpose and pride. This is an all-around, far healthier environment to live in. How do I know that? Because we all used to live in similar communities, and things were healthier and happier then. Even the polls show that. Things have only gotten worse for everyone since we abandoned this communal way of life. It is actually dizzying to stop and think about how quickly these once commonplace communities have been dismantled. Neighbors used to know each other, and well. They went to church together. Their kids played together and slept over regularly. They went trick-or-treating together and swimming together. Their teenagers rode their bikes all over town together and played sports together. Some of their parents worked together or were on the PTA together. They would stop and talk to each other while they were out mowing the lawn or getting the mail. This was just the normal society that we all lived in not that long ago. Now it's very easy to live for years in the same location and to never have had even a single conversation with even one of your neighbors. Many people no longer go to church or participate in any kind of common activity that reinforces the bonds of community. And we wonder why we all feel so alone and isolated? This is not how we were meant to live. It doesn't work. And we don't have to accept this dissatisfying lives for ourselves if we don't want to. People are trying to find that missing sense of community again. It's just too fundamentally necessary for human beings to lead a healthy and satisfying life. Some people want this back enough to make the effort to start going to a community center or even to a gym. And they're not going there to work out alone. They're going to participate in classes or in games and group activities that require them to interact with other people. Why? Because we are hardwired with a deep need for that interaction. We all felt this need keenly during COVID. Being kept in almost complete isolation from the rest of mankind was both stifling and depressing for everyone. And it wasn't long before it was driving even the homebodies crazy. Screens were clearly no substitute for the real thing, although we were glad to have anything that connected us with each other at that point. Yet, despite their desire to have more, many people are having a very difficult time re-engaging with others face to face, even though COVID restrictions have been gone for years now. Younger people have had it tougher than almost anyone else because they spent all of their formative years in an unnatural isolation as a result of both COVID and their overly protective helicopter parents. Many of them have been overindulged for their entire lives, having every toddler-level whim catered to with all the seriousness of a weighty and immediate problem. They've grown up being the audience for some weird stage performance put on by the adults in their lives, where everything that the child feels becomes a production and is treated like a life and death priority, no matter how trivial or even selfish it actually is. Every thought that they've ever had was treated as though it was profound, valid, and important in this play. And absolutely no pushback was ever given to challenge them, even if the thought was ridiculous. These non-stop parental performances were done in the name of building the child's self-esteem, but it meant that these kids didn't grow up in reality. They grew up in a 24-hour-a-day play which their parents and teachers put on for them. And now these poor young people exemplify the idea of that addict who clings to what is familiar because they believe that giving it up is going to be a sacrifice instead of a reality-altering liberation for themselves. Sadly, society is continuing to fail them as much as their parents did initially. How many young girls are being encouraged to satisfy their desire for attention in order to feel valuable as a young woman by prostituting themselves on OnlyFans? And how many of them continue down that path only because, like most porn stars, once they've started down that road, they feel trapped into staying on it because the damage has been done and it feels too late to change now? Or maybe they feel too ashamed of having gotten themselves into this in the first place to even entertain the idea of changing courses once again. It never occurs to them to blame the people who knew better and yet encourage them to do this to themselves because their values demand that everyone pretend that something is liberating, even when it leads to anything but freedom or happiness. Why do these girls never blame the other women who lied to them to get them here in the first place? How many of these young girls feel better about themselves after going down this path, or more valuable as human beings? I don't mean how many of them say that they feel great about their choices on a podcast designed to mock them, or in their social media posts. What else are they going to say? I mean, how many of them actually, as they lay in bed in the middle of a still night, left alone with only their own thoughts, actually feel like a worthy and valuable human being as a result of what they've been doing with their lives and their bodies? Do you honestly believe that even one of them feels better about themselves deep down for selling themselves like a commodity? So why are we participating in continuing to tell lies like these to our young people, despite knowing deep down the truth of the damage that it does to them? Who exactly is that supposed to be helping? And the same goes for young men. They are being told that having goals and ambitions is toxic. They are being told that what they are as men is inherently a bad thing. And at the same time, they are also being told that they are no longer needed in the world and that they have no real role to play or meaningful place in our society anymore. As a result of that constant and unbelievably demoralizing messaging, young men are generally breaking in one of two directions. One group tries to ape the now forbidden concept of masculinity and follows the Andrew Tates of the world. The other group tries to make themselves female adjacent enough to be acceptable in the world. And they end up living lives of repression full of hidden secret shames. Both groups often have a serious addiction to pornography, which pretty much guarantees that they won't have healthy or successful relationships with women, which only frustrates them further. And developing substance abuse problems as a coping mechanism is not exactly rare either. Neither is suicide, unfortunately. I'm going to say this very clearly. True masculinity is not toxic. It is anything but. And I'm tired of watching it be demonized. So are a lot of women. True masculinity is both valuable and vitally necessary to both women and to society as a whole. And if I'm betraying the sisterhood by saying that, then so be it. I'm more committed to honesty than I am to the ideologies held by a subset of my gender. And I make no apologies for that to these bullies just because they happen to be women bullies. Likewise, men aren't entitled to my respect just because they have an XY chromosome. But if you are truly living up to the responsibilities of what it means to be a man, then you absolutely are entitled to respect for that. There is a big difference between a boy and a man. And I'm not going to pretend that a boy trapped in a man's body is living up to what it means to be a man. But I'm also not going to pretend that a real man who is working hard to achieve his goals, serving his family and community, and trying to live his life in accordance with the ideas of honor and dignity is toxic, just because that's the popular position to take within certain groups that have become pretty toxic themselves. So maybe they should spend some time contemplating that whole first remove the plank from your own eye before you worry about the speck of dust in your neighbor's eye thing. Simply put, whether it offends your ideology about what makes for a better world or not, the path that we have been going down is quickly approaching a dead end. And we all feel it. Most people want to be happy more than they want to be right. Although there are exceptions to that rule. But you won't convince people who think like that to change their priorities, even for their own sake. So they'll either catch up eventually or they won't. But you only have one life to live. So you shouldn't waste it on their behalf. It would be insane to let them determine how you live your one and only life. I know of no one that is interested in trying to force other people to choose a different path for themselves, just because that is what they are doing. But most of them are desperately searching for a different path for themselves. And that's a search that is too important to ever give up on just because it offends some people who are allowing themselves to be childish bullies, pitching a fit when it comes to these subjects being discussed. I think part of why podcasts have become so popular is not only because there are podcasts that are available for literally any interest you might have, and it's not only because it's such a customizable form of entertainment. I think it's also because watching people engage in real connections with each other through real discussions is clearly meeting a certain deeply rooted longing to have that very thing to some small degree for a lot of people. But obviously, podcasts alone are not enough to sustain someone without something more tangible existing in their lives as well. Likewise, the truth which people need to come to terms with is that even this gargantuan government can't help you with most of the needs in your life, no matter how big you make it. They'll simply never be able to change your day-to-day life in a truly meaningful way. no matter how much you want them to. It's not possible. Governments aren't designed for that. And no government has ever been capable of doing that for its people. So stop looking in all the wrong places for the fundamental things in life. Those things come from community, neighbors, family, and deep friendships. They come from relationships. And you can't have a relationship with your government, or with a politician that you kind of like, or with a tiny screen in your hand. The best thing that any politician can actually do for you is to get out of the way. Empower your local structures by giving them what they need to succeed and thrive, and then don't interfere any more than is necessary. The first rule of government is just like the first rule of medicine. First, do no harm. Think about it. After any natural disaster, it's neighbors and churches and volunteers that help people the most. It's other human beings, not the government. Even if they truly wanted to, a faceless government can't provide you with a real sense of safety or with true support in the way that the people around you can. And that limit on their very potential also limits their power over you, which is probably why so many politicians and corporations are actively encouraging people to cut off all of those more meaningful relationships and trying to get people to label them as being too much of a burden to bother with keeping them around. They want you to have nothing to compare them to in your life that is more effective than them, and nowhere else to turn to, so that you look to them for everything. But doing so will always leave you disappointed, because they aren't capable of giving you more than they already do. As human beings, we need both a sense of purpose and a sense of value as a person, which comes from fulfilling that purpose and knowing that we are contributing to at least some degree to the greater good. A world that consists exclusively of the self is not even capable of producing either of those things in someone's life. It is just too empty of a world to provide any real sustenance for you to live on. You can choose to view a statement like that as an insult to your value or your identity, if you want to. Or you can choose to view it as an obvious truth that is simply being pointed out and acknowledge the reality of it instead. After all, no one will ever know if you are being disloyal to the cause by being honest with yourself in your own head right now. Even the people who do choose to center their entire life around gratifying each and every fleeting whim that takes possession of them are characterized by this incessant need to have attention from others as they do it. There are social influencers whose entire message to the world centers around being proud of things that don't actually matter. Pride is something that you're supposed to feel about achieving a real accomplishment. When you graduate from school, you have accomplished something, and therefore you feel proud of that achievement. When you serve your country in the military, you have survived the rigorous training and have made a contribution to the greater good, and you are therefore proud of those achievements. When you continue to advance and succeed in your career or in building a family, you have actually done something, and therefore you feel a sense of satisfaction and pride about what you have done. When you help someone else, you feel good about yourself. You just do. It's how we're built. But these days, it has become trendy to express feeling a sense of pride about things that aren't accomplishments at all, over things that are just a fact of your existence. Now, to be clear, just because you are not proud of something does not mean that you are ashamed of it. There is an entire realm of neutrality that lies between something that you should be ashamed of and something that you should be proud of. For instance, it would be ridiculous of me to say that I am proud of my eye color. There is no accomplishment in that to be proud of. It's just the result of meaningless genetics. I can like my eye color without being proud of it. It would be the same thing if I said that I was proud of my height. What exactly is there to be proud about in that? That doesn't mean that if I'm not proud of my height, then the default position is that I'm ashamed of it. It just falls into the realm of unimportant, trivial things that I feel appropriately neutral about, as I should. But the world has become full of very childish all-or-nothing games. If I say that my height is not something to be proud of, what some people hear is that I'm saying I should be ashamed of my height. Those are actually not the same statement. When people say that they are proud of sleeping around, the thought that runs through my mind is, why? It is not as though sleeping with someone is an accomplishment. It's not as though this is a difficult and complicated process that few beings ever achieve, like climbing Mount Everest or something. Literally every organism on the earth, even the most primitive forms of life, managed to do it. So, why is that something to be proud of? That's not actually a feeling of pride. And deep down, it fools no one. That's defiance. What they really mean is, I'm not ashamed of sleeping around. To which I can't help but think, okay, who said that you were? Did I? They just gave themselves away. The shame came from them, not from me. That is just a human-level gut reaction to their own perception that other people will see that as a shameful thing, and therefore they're going to preemptively declare it to be some admirable virtue instead. They are almost daring you to disagree with them. But their own need to express feeling pride in sleeping around, in answer to a question that literally no one is asking them, gives away the reality that they obviously feel anything but pride about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't feel the need to comment on it or to justify it at all. Just like I wouldn't feel the need to justify my eye color or my height. It's the same thing with all these sexual orientations being proclaimed left and right today. We have entire months and public parades devoted to people who feel the need to express pride in the fact that they are sexually attracted to this group instead of that group. But once again, there is no accomplishment in that. We are all attracted to whoever we are attracted to. Whether we are born that way or whether it's a result of our environment or both, that doesn't really change the fact that one way or another, it's certainly not an accomplishment to feel a sexual attraction towards someone. Taking pride in that would make no more sense than taking pride in the fact that you're attracted to brunettes instead of to blondes. That would be a ludicrous thing to take pride in. And I'm sorry, but all of these new orientations are totally bogus. They just translate, like so many things today, into, look at me, look at me. There is no such thing as an ecosexual, and I swear I have not made that up. If you're lucky enough that you don't live in the online world and you think I'm making that up, I have not made that up. There is no such thing as an ecosexual, no matter what people out there are saying. So stop being weird just to get attention. and stop molesting nature without its consent. Can we be serious, please? Enough of this world of non-stop performances that we are all supposed to pretend that we believe. We don't. You don't. No one does. So let's just call the whole thing off. A life that is centered exclusively on oneself doesn't leave room for any real accomplishments. It only leaves room for identity, because that's all you have when your whole world is you. And therefore, the only claim to pride for a person living that way is to claim to feel pride based on the facets of their identity. But there's no real pride in that. They only have one well to draw from, and it's not very deep. And the sad fact that there is nothing substantive to be proud of in a random part of your identity that just happened to turn out that way is the very reason why people without any real accomplishments or even any real ambitions feel the most need to incessantly declare their sense of pride in themselves. A pride that, sadly, they have never actually experienced or felt. But they don't actually have to limit their small universe to a kiddie pool that is made up of one person, themselves. The incredible truth is that we live on an impossibly unique global sphere that is spinning through space and is capable of sustaining life, that is hovering in an orbit around a giant ball of radiation, and all of that together is spinning through an infinite universe of countless other galaxies. That is the unbelievable truth about our very existence. But what is even more real than that truth is your own small world, the one that you actually live in. It is made up of the places that you see with your own eyes, the people that you come into physical contact with, the grass that you touch, and the air that you breathe. That is what is real. Truly realizing this is what will enable you to set aside all of the empty filters and the barriers between you and the pulsating reality that surrounds you. It is so important to actually remember to take the time regularly to stop and look up at life. Thomas Sowell said, "Much of the societal history of the Western world over the past 3 decades has involved replacing what worked with what sounded good. In area after area, crime, education, housing, race relations, the situation has gotten worse after the bright new theories were put into operation. The amazing thing is that this history of failure and disaster has neither discouraged the social engineers nor discredited them." End quote. This is also true of those giving out life advice on how other people can find true happiness, although they don't seem to have found it themselves yet. They're personal failures in that area, and usually in every other area too. And even the failures of those who have listened to them and followed their advice never seems to translate into discrediting them, or even into a realization that however good their philosophy sounds, it doesn't work. At least that has been the case until recently. I truly do believe that this is beginning to change. Maybe it's because people simply can't ignore how dissatisfied and miserable they are in their own lives, despite years of devotedly believing that if they just committed to this concept with even more devotion, then they too would eventually achieve the happiness that the people promoting this way of life pretend to experience personally. This is the problem with luxury beliefs of any kind. The people who preach them often don't actually live by them. Upper-class feminists didn't generally date the kind of men who were likely to hit them. For the most part, they went out with men who came from upper-class families like their own, and who were raised with better values than that. Or at the very least, these men knew that they would be shunned by their own circles of polite society if they failed to live up to the acceptable standards of behavior toward women. So it was fine and dandy for these women to say that it was offensive for men to open doors for women or to carry their bags, or for them to say that women don't need a man to patronize them by offering these gestures of respect. A woman can do everything for herself. But for women in a totally different class of society, who went out with men that didn't necessarily come from good backgrounds, and who wouldn't be shunned by their circles for getting physical with a woman, societal norms like respecting women enough to go through the ritual of opening the door for them also served as a reminder, which often translated into the need to restrain one's temper with them as well. So it wasn't the feminists who paid the price for their luxury beliefs. It was the women who had no say in this change to societal values. That's what having a luxury belief is, a belief that you have the luxury of espousing because you don't experience the consequences of it. Someone else does. The same was true of the elite academic types who decided that marriage wasn't really necessary and was mostly a societal construction. They declared, therefore, that divorce had no real downsides for the children. Statistically, we know that most of these academic types live in long-term marriages themselves while testing out their theory on others. And although divorce can be the lesser of two evils in certain situations, all the available evidence proves that this luxury belief about it being consequence-free for the children was anything but correct. This charlatan occupation of preaching luxury beliefs to others has more recent examples too. There was the female social influencer who had built her entire platform on encouraging her female followers to forego relationships with men as a matter of feminist principles, while she hid the fact that she herself was in a serious relationship with a man until the news broke of their engagement, after which she rightly lost a lot of credibility with everyone who had been listening to her up until that point. The body positivity movement is another luxury belief campaign. Once again, this is not an all-or-nothing game. I know of no one who wants to shame a person for being overweight. But that doesn't mean that you have to praise them for being overweight or tell them to be proud of being overweight. And it certainly doesn't mean that we should lie to people and encourage them to also become overweight by telling them that it has no consequences on their health, when that is just a bald-faced lie. It has just about every kind of health consequence imaginable. And most of the people, not all, but many of the people who back the body positivity movement are themselves not overweight. So they aren't the ones who are going to lead uncomfortable and difficult lives in straitjackets made out of their own body. It's not them who is going to die young before their time. It is absolutely a luxury belief for people like this to hold and continue to spread. And one can't help but wonder if, at least on a subconscious level, some of their support for encouraging other people to be obese when they aren't obese themselves isn't just them getting a chunk of the competition out of their way in life. You see this in issue after issue. Celebrities and politicians who supported defunding the police and not prosecuting criminals and having open borders, all while they live in gated communities with the private security that they can hire to protect them from the results of their own luxury beliefs, the consequences of which they continue to insist on inflicting on the rest of us because it makes them feel virtuous to hold these ideas. And if we object to living with the consequences of their luxury beliefs, ones that they have the power to shield themselves from, then they declare that we are all just a bunch of racists Most people are tired of all the ideas that sound good in theory, but have led to misery in their own lives. They simply want something that works when it comes to making their own lives better. And that spells disaster for the people who are in the business of selling pretty ideas that fail to produce any pretty results. People have reached a level of desperation where they are beginning to demand more from those who are drunk on the sound of their own voices and swoon with love at the sight of their own reflection on social media. We are reaching a point where people are willing to come out and say that we don't find their navel-gazing all that profound, or their brain farts as intoxicating as they do. And I think that will prove to be a generally healthy thing for society as a whole. We need to start being honest about what is contributing positive results in our lives and what isn't. But whether or not society decides to head in a more serious direction, and I think they will, but either way, this is your life, and you only get to live it once. So don't just blunder through this miraculous opportunity without giving it any serious thought, as you automatically follow the guy in front of you who has some random bad advice to offer. Actually consider the rationale behind what people are claiming and the choices that you're making. Make deliberate decisions when it comes to the way that you build your life, because yes, a life is something that you build, not something that you just fall into and land wherever you happen to end up. That may be how life starts, but that's not how you want to live it up until the moment it ends. You can choose one of two paths in life. Whichever one you choose, you're going to be giving up the other path by making a choice. But the question is, which regret can you live with? You can aim ever inward and spiral down internally, or you can aim up and further outward into the unknown. Which one of those two possibilities sounds like it contains a wider world of possibilities to you? Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and follow, because that's how these things become successful. And I hope you come back for part 2 next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.